will be acting as the voice of the audience. So if at any time you'd like to ask questions of the panel, please use the Q&A tab on the Zoom control and type it in, and I will start into the conversation as I can. And now Yodit Stanton.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. This session will cover data-driven design or evidence-based design. Essentially what that means is using data from usually collected from sensors and other things around enabling people to understand how space is being used and also the design of the space. A lot of the trends we're seeing is in, especially in building occupiers, remotely managing the buildings. They're also starting to use these data sets to inform the design and inform the future planning.
Hi, yeah. So the reason why I started working with Yodit and Zaha, Hadid, architect, started working with her is because we're really interested in the potential of sensors. I think architects and designers have always struggled in office projects to really accurately understand client needs. If you think of office design, it's kind of the opposite of house design, residential design. Instead of a family of 2, 4, 6 people who are also the primary users of the building, in an office there are hundreds, possibly thousands of users with very diverse behaviors and requirements. And often these requirements are contradictory to other people's requirements. And I think sensors provide a really fascinating tool for a really powerful tool for understanding workplace needs, as we never really have been able to before. We no longer need to rely on assumptions and preconceptions of how people work, or upon sometimes pretty simplistic benchmarking, or even worse, just copying what other companies do. So if we see a company that's successful, then we sometimes there's the liability to copy their workplace, and we've seen this in the last few years with you know, bean bags, foosballs, and the kind of dreaded slide. So sensors really give us the opportunity to kind of take the guesswork out, take the assumptions out, and start to understand real needs of workplace users.
So from our perspective, I think one of the interesting trends we're seeing is obviously the kind of the change in how people plan the spaces, and this need comes from 2 ends. The first is really kind of most people are finding that especially the workspace is heavily underutilized. When you think about big cities, for example in London, the average cost of a desk is somewhere between kind of 13K to 15K a year, and you know, for most people, it's like how many desks do I need? If I have 100 employees, do I really need 100 desks, or do I need 80? And the second is the second obvious one is obviously meeting rooms. Like that's obviously always a point of contention for organizations, especially with kind of booking systems and so forth, where people are booking kind of large times. It's not about just how many desks and how many meeting rooms do I need, but it's actually what's the appropriate number of sized ones. So for meeting rooms, for example, concentrating a lot about, you know, do I need phone booths versus meeting rooms, and how many of these, you know, per person do I need? There's another obviously kind of trend is in understanding kind of I suppose the environmental aspects, which is around air quality, both linked to enabling kind of healthy buildings, but also kind of things like the World Building Standard are driving a lot of these trends. and noisy versus quiet areas. Like where should, like what should my space allocation be? What's appropriate for the people that I have?
Yeah, and I just want to add something to what Yodit was saying, because yeah, it's so important in the workplace, because workplaces are so expensive that what we don't do is waste space. That we don't have spaces that are being underutilized, like meeting areas, or possibly possibly amenity spaces that might not be as popular as people predicted they would be. But also there's a flip side as well, that we can often find that some spaces are overutilized in the workplace, or at least maybe overutilized is the wrong word, but are basically like with meeting rooms, that there might be certain sizes of meeting rooms that are always booked, that people can never get into. And then the problem is much worse, because it isn't just about the problem isn't about waste, it's about people not being able to do their job properly. And if people can't communicate and can't collaborate properly because they simply fundamentally can't find a meeting room to do that in at the right time, then that can have a real effect on business efficiency and productivity. So what we find with sensors is it's not just about seeing where we've got too much space somewhere, but also where we've got too little space. And I think that, but also what we've found is that getting this kind of data doesn't just get us to better solutions. It gets us to better solutions more quickly. The thing with architects and designers is we pretty much we often don't have problems coming up with ideas. We're pretty good with that. Our issue often is working out which ideas are good and which are not. And it's not just an issue for designers, it's an issue for the clients as well, who have to sign off on these ideas. And what we found is that sensors help us to really understand which ideas are going to work and which ones are not going to work. Often what we'll do is look to do some kind of workplace analysis before a relocation or refurbishment, so an assessment of a current work environment. And doing sensors can really help us to do that most effectively. They help us to understand what the future workplace needs to be like. They help us to understand which spaces are under or overutilized, how to get the right balance of spaces, but also where to locate the spaces as well. Because often a space might not be popular just because of its location within the building. It might be underused just because of the location. And then also what functionality spaces have. Often that's why spaces are not being used effectively. It might not be because it's the wrong size of meeting room. It might be because it's the wrong type of meeting space. And so what we can do is we can say, okay, well, here are some identical meeting rooms in the building. Why are these ones being used and why are these not being used? And it might be because of, for instance, because of the technology in the space, that some of them really just don't have the right technology in them.
So I had a question for you. So Yoda presented figures that it was 13 to 15,000 pounds a year per space in downtown London. And I would think that the energy usage in at least an office setting is probably an order of magnitude less, maybe more. And yet we've spent more time probably trying to instrument the energy usage than we have the space usage. Why do you think the space usage has lagged?
Okay, well, that's a fantastic point. And the reason why the space usage has lagged is because people haven't been able to monitor it as carefully. So people, for some time now, with building management systems, people have been able to monitor and address issues with energy usage. So they can see it right in front of them. They can look at all the data and they can see what areas are using too much energy, and they can test out ways of reducing energy and seeing how effective they are. And people haven't really had that ability to do that with occupancy at the moment until now, really, with sensors. So I think that occupancy of space is really going to catch up in terms of assessment. And as you're saying, that yeah, there's a magnitude of cost of cost saving that is much higher in occupancy of space. And also, the other thing is that one of the biggest wastes of energy is too much space. First, you have to build it. If you're building too much space, well, there's a lot of energy that goes into the construction, etc. And then, of course, you're having to put energy into too much space all the way through the life cycle. But I just want to say one more thing, that there's something else which is at a much, much, much higher magnitude of cost than the space. And that is the people in the building. So you're probably, say that you're including all the national insurance and all the other things that go into the recruitment costs, etc., that go into an average employee. Let's guess that it's £100,000 a year, okay, including everything for an average employee. Mm-hmm. So that is already 7 times more than the cost of the actual desk. And if you can, from getting a better design place, from getting a better design workspace, if you can increase the productivity, the efficiency, the effectiveness, the well-being of your staff by 5-6%, that's already half the cost of the entire space. And if you can raise it by 12-13%, you've just paid for your whole building or for your whole workplace. So that's where the real savings can come. So one of the things we can do is look at where do sensors show us where some of the blockages might be in the building, some of the spaces that really are not helping people to perform effectively. And one of them, of course, is just not finding the right size, right type of meeting room or meeting space when you need it.
Yes, I totally agree.
So the kind of whole idea of monitoring the workplace to see how we can make it more effective, to see what blockages there might be to staff productivity, isn't in itself something new. People have been doing it for a very long time, you know, for 100 years, ever since the original kind of time in motion studies that were done in workplaces. But you know, a lot of these techniques, and I've been working with a lot of different techniques for the last sort of 20 years now, and they're really kind of sloppy in the end compared with sensors. So, for instance, you can look at the swipe card data to see how many people are occupying the building, but that doesn't really tell you anything once they've gone into the building. You can ask people, you can carry out surveys and ask people what spaces are working well and what are not, but that ends up being very subjective. And the only technique we have found, that I've found as a workplace consultant, but kind of started to really do more than scratch the surface, was space utilization studies. And what we would do with a space utilization study is to start one end of a building or start one end of a floor plate and walk to the other end of the floor plate, and then walk to the next floor plate and the next floor plate, and walk as many desks as we could within an hour, and then turn around and start again, and do that for 8 hours, and mark down at every location what's happening at the desk or what's happening in the meeting room. And we do that over a week. and about one person could probably cover about 100 desks that they would, maybe 200 possibly, that they would repeat, every hour. And that would give us a snapshot over a week of how spaces were being used. And this is very, very useful for organizations. However, the problem is it was just 1 week, and it would only be for that second you walked past the desk during the hour. So if someone happened to get up to use the restroom for 5 minutes and then sat down at their desk, well, you wouldn't have got that. You'd think for the hour it was unoccupied. And so, and also it would be very time consuming, and it'd be very expensive because you'd have to have someone for a whole week. And if you had 1,000 desks, you'd have to have 5 people doing it for a week. So what sensors have done is they have massively cut the cost of carrying out this kind of exercise and the amount of time taken. So I think that's something, also, having carried out a lot of those studies, they are crushingly boring after a while. So it's great to be able to have this kind of technology now, to not have to have people carrying that out, so they can spend their time on much kind of higher level work in the analysis of the data. And what we also found is that although space utilization studies were very useful to give a kind of general picture, they weren't that persuasive, because people knew that they were only done over a week, or they knew that actually it was only a snapshot of a second within that hour. And I think that that sometimes managers and executives were a bit suspicious of them. And so now, with sensors, I think that suspicion is going to be much, much less, that they're going to really be able to see this is very, very rigorous data.
Yes, and just to expand on Arjun's points, I think the smart buildings trend has, from my point of view, actually started with these replacing these very manual tasks of space utilization surveys. So often people use kind of meeting room sensors, footfall sensors, and obviously desks, and a lot of these manual tasks are very easy to replace because they're counting or they're binary, somebody's here or not. And then overlaying other data points is very, very easy. I mean, once you have the network in place for kind of the utilization surveys, then you start thinking, well, what's the air quality like? What's the noise like? So for sure, the space utilization has been the kind of the beachhead, as it were, for this trend in the smart buildings trend.
Hey, we had one question on the surveys that that they're also useful to detect what are called signs of life, where there are items left on decks, coats, laptops, things like that. Is there an equivalent for the survey, for the sensor-based surveys?
Well, yeah. So there are different types of sensors that we've been looking at, and often it's good to have a couple of different types of monitoring in the space, so you can check it against each other. And one of them is using cameras, and those will so those can for using video cameras, those can pick up if they're you can check and see whether that desk really was used for 9 hours, or whether it was just someone's jacket on the back of it. And I think that it's still something that we need to look into further with that, because it's something. What I've found is that a lot of this, if you've got a hot desking environment that you're checking up on, and you want to see how well a space is utilized, then it's good to have certain protocols in place. So to say to people, if you're going to be away from your desk for more, if you're going to be away from the desk for more than 2 hours, then you should remove stuff from it. If you're going to a meeting for an hour, then it should be okay to leave a jacket on the back of the desk, on the back of a chair, I mean, or stuff at the table, because you don't want to be going to a meeting, coming back and seeing that your desk is gone. But I think that we still need to we still need to be very careful of the data that we get to make sure that it's correct data.
One more thing to add to that, obviously, is I think utilization, there's degrees of it. So kind of whilst you might not necessarily have kind of, there's an item on the desk, so there's a sign of life, but there's degrees of how much people use the space. So sometimes people just drop off the stuff and, for example, use a desk for all of 10 minutes. And I think you can easily categorize if 10 minutes if a desk has been used over 10 minutes over an 8-hour day, it's a different category to somebody sitting there for a number of hours. So I suppose on the aggregation level, one of the things that we work hard to do is in categorizing or bucketing those kinds of behaviors.
So I had one more question come in that I thought was good, which was in Arjun's remarks. He mentioned that you can tell if there's a need for a certain space. The question was, how do you tell if people have tried but failed to find a certain type of space? So you can see that the meeting, is there any way to, you can see that a meeting room is in very high use. Are there any ways to detect kind of stockouts or people have tried but failed to find a certain type of space? The answer may be no, I don't know.
If people have tried and failed, so they wanted to have a meeting.
So I needed a phone booth, but I couldn't find it, right? Or I needed a 2-person conference or a 4-person conference room, and I ended up in the big room because everything else was busy.
Well, no, but what you can do is you can be pretty sure that that's happened if space is 100% utilized. We're not looking to get 100% utilization because that's exactly where these problems emerge. So what we're looking to do is get, if we get 80–90% utilization of any space, then that's fantastic, and that allows for leeway. So that's part of the answer, really. But as soon as you start seeing really high utilization, as soon as you start getting 95, 100% utilization of any kind of meeting space, you start thinking this is a problem. This means that this is an overused space. This doesn't mean this is great, it's 100% utilized. It means that there are definitely people who've been trying to book that space and it's not been available for them.
One point would be that I think, sensors are also complementary to the kind of in-depth conversations, and I would never say, even as a sensor company, that they would replace a lot of the kind of in-depth conversations and that you'd have. I think they're complementing the human element, which is asking the kind of the deeper questions and satisfaction questions. Works really well for the very kind of should we say, counting type surveys.
Yeah, I mean, so for instance, to give an example of that, a few years ago, I had a client who was in Canada, on the west coast of Canada, and we did a space utilization survey because sensors were not available then. And we also did a questionnaire. And in the questionnaire, we found that people kept on saying, I can never find a meeting room when I need it. And then we looked at the space utilization study and found that on average, the meeting rooms were used 30% of the time. And then we looked at, okay, so are there any particular meeting rooms which are used all the time, which they can't find? And the answer was no. The highest meeting room usage was 60% of the time. And then we thought, okay, but these people can't, they're telling the truth. This must be the case. So we carried out a few interviews, and we found out that the issue, and it was so obvious once we'd been told it, was they were having video conferences or just audio conferences with the East Coast of Canada, with other colleagues who are across Canada. And there's a 3 or 4 hour time difference. So there's only certain parts of the day when everyone was in the office. So there was a sort of 4 or 5 hours in the day where East Coast and West Coast could talk to each other. And so what that meant was these meeting rooms were booked solid those times of the day and were not used the rest of the day. So we were able to start designing around that. But until we knew that, until we asked for questions, the data wasn't giving us the full picture. It was, just as Yodit is saying, but often it really needs to be complemented with the kind of human side.
Thank you. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of 3 points that are, I think, the 3 uses or the 3 kind of points that most people that we see are using for the sensor data point. The first is, how much space do I need currently? And a lot of the time that is just what is my usage over kind of some time period. And once you get enough data, you can also kind of start saying, well, what is my growth, and what capacities do I need in the coming kind of time frame. We've already covered the data-driven design part, so that's the next slide, which is back to you, Arjun.
Yeah, so what we are really looking to do is to fundamentally use sensors to design workplaces that really match the user needs. That it's not just the user at the individual level, it's also looking at how teams work and what's right for the organization in general. So it's really looking at those kind of 3 scales: individuals, teams, and companies. And then it's also not just looking at day one. I think one of the exciting things about sensors is that we can put them into a workplace. We can put them into an existing workplace before people move to a new workplace, and we can find out a bit more about their needs from doing that. And then when we go into the new workplace, we can put sensors in those as well, and those sensors can stay long term. And what that allows us to do is to be able to monitor the success of the workplace, so that we can come back in and adapt and change the workplace as needed to keep up with the changes in the organization and the way people are working. So it's kind of really helping us as designers, not just to design for day one, but to design for year 5, year 10, and to make sure that the building or the workplace is effective throughout its life cycle.
One question I had on this was how you see the role of architects changing, because as I understood it, previously architects kind of design the space and maybe do the project and walk away from the project. As you have these live systems gathering and generating data, like how do you see kind of the role of architects changing in terms of involvement in that space?
Well, yeah, I think that I think this can make a really big difference to the way that architects design space, because it'll start to mean that we're designing more for flexibility, for adaptability in future. That we're not just looking at designing in day one. The sensors are kind of holding the architect sort of accountable. But rather than being able to just just take a few beautiful photos of a workplace and walk away, that we'll be made to see how it's working, how it's operating as time goes by. And so I think that we're going to have to design for more adaptability, design for more flexibility. And I think we're going to need to, it's going to hold us more accountable to end users. So we've, just a little bit about kind of Zaha, Hadid, specifically why we're interested in sensors. And I think that part of it's because we've always been known for being for our unique and innovative designs, but it's never really about, for us, it's never about designing something different. It's about designing something better. And I think that sensors and other technology like that allow us to understand client needs, the user needs in so much more depth, so that we can design something that is better for them. And rather than just in the past using things like rules of thumb and best practice, going about design in a kind of, how do I do this? It's more about, how could I do this and how should I do this? So how could I do this? By looking at understanding clients' needs. And then how should I do this? From really understanding, are the innovations that I'm putting in, are they going to be driving value? Are they going to be helping people to be more productive? Are they going to be improving wellness? Are they going to be allowing for more flexibility or for more connectedness? And I think that's really where we're coming from as a practice.
Just to go into what we do.
So Yodit, did you just skip the types of sensors?
No, that's
coming up. Sorry. Okay. Sorry.
So in terms of what OpenSensors do, I think most of our clients, we're a technology company, and most of our customers come to us and say, we want to do these kind of projects. What is, can you recommend sensors? And we spent a lot of time really finding and evaluating and building partnerships with various manufacturers, and to be kind of a neutral in a sense of being able to kind of recommend, kind of independently recommend sensors, because this gets, I think, it gets very complex to evaluate, kind of batteries and connectivity and so forth. In terms of our service, obviously we aggregate and understand data. I think there's, once people start deploying sensors of a few thousand sensors, then you get to a point where the management side becomes quite complex, and we try to make it easy. And the other thing that I think the more I work in this space, the most important thing is actually what people care about is integration, integrating with the tools that people use already, whether it's design tools, whether it's the existing facilities management tools, and so forth. We generally, as a firm, feel that kind of this trend towards smart buildings is an evolution in terms of the data already exists, whether it's from manual surveys and from other points. It's really kind of evolving the way that the data is generated, And I think this is true for the wider kind of IoT world as well, where you're replacing or you're automating stuff that was hard to do and possibly unreliable previously, and going into a world that you have much more kind of regular data as well.
So we've talked a bit about sensors that are used for desk utilization. We've talked about a little bit about sensors being used for meeting room counting. So with that, really looking at not just what the whether meeting rooms are being utilized or not, but also whether they're being utilized by an appropriate amount of people. So have you got these rooms for 20 people that are occupied a lot, but actually there's just 1 or 2 people sitting in them at any time? People are having really small meetings of 3 or 4 people in them, or they're just having, they're just going there to make a private phone call. So it starts to give us that kind of data. But I think what's also really interesting is if we cross-reference data. So if we also can look at noise levels, lighting levels, CO2 levels, other environmental levels, and see what effect that has on the workplace. So does, for instance, if we have a hot desk environment where people can sit anywhere they want, do we find that they end up sitting closer to the windows, closer to the daylight, for instance? Or is that actually not a significant factor? Are there bigger draws to people? Do they want to sit near to amenity spaces? Or do they want to sit near to the restroom, for instance? So what are the things that drive people in terms of their behaviors and what that means in terms of their preferences? What we can also do is look at footfall in the same way. We can look at, okay, so what are the areas that people are going into most? And at what times in the day? And why are they going then and not other times? Or why are they using certain spaces or not other spaces? And then looking at what's happening maybe with circulation spaces. If we have informal breakout areas, for instance, do we want to put those next to circulation? Or do we want to put those away from circulation? Are people more likely to use them if they're right on circulation where they can see them, where they're easy to get to? Or are people more likely to use them when there's a little bit of privacy, when there's a little bit less distraction, when they're further away from circulation? And these are the kind of things that as architects and designers, we don't really know the answers yet. And sensors can really help us do that. And the problem is, even if we found out the answer for another company, so we thought, well, in this other company, the breakout space worked really well in these locations, that doesn't mean it's going to work for a different organization. And I think that's what sensors really helps us to do as well. It helps us to look at the uniqueness of companies rather than looking at what we've done before as designers and architects and just think that's going to work.
So just going into how people are looking at the data, I think there's, again, with sensor data, there's 2 ways, there's 2 usual ways of looking at it. There's the spatial analysis, which is, I want to see what's going on. It's usually, I want to see what's going on right now on some sort of a map. That can be an indoor map, so overlaying the data over the CAD drawing of the space itself. And that tends to be quite kind of based on a snapshot of a time or what's currently happening. And then there's the kind of the time series side, which is the what are my trends and what are my historical kind of information that I can kind of gather. So what is the trends around peaks and averages and timelines, and then kind of from that, especially from a certain amount of data, historical data, then you can gather a lot more information around the kind of the future use of the space.
Yodit, we had one. We have one question on the manual surveys versus the sensors. How often are the sensors actually recording the occupancy?
So the sensors can be configured, I mean, the average is around 10 minutes, but you can configure it based on need. But most people, I think 10 minutes is enough. So you have trade-offs between the number of times you sample and the amount of, obviously, the amount of battery life you're going to get out of the sensor. But yeah, just kind of 10 minutes is, from what I see, good enough. But you can do more. You can sample kind of minutely or any amount that you like.
Okay.
So I just wanted to kind of go into just the kind of practical implementation gotchas that most people, if you go into this world of sensor networks, I think we've said this before, but you know, managing networks, what you need to think about is not just the cost of the sensor networks, but how to efficiently manage them. When I say the cost of the sensor networks, I mean the cost per sensor. The trickier aspect is in managing, ensuring that kind of implementation and management is as efficient as possible. So as an example, I think we stated before, but you know, kind of the manual kind of maintenance and changing batteries and installing sensors can be a lot more than the cost of the sensors. So our aim is to get these the install and maintenance that kind of friction down. I touched on this previously, but I think the other gotcha in managing data networks is testing the sensor reliability. Battery usage is a big gotcha. I mean, if you have sensors that don't last very long, you're adding a large overhead of somebody having to come and change the batteries regularly, and so forth. We try to encourage people to use networks that where the batteries can last up to 2 years. 18 months to 2 years is I think minimum. The other aspect is the data quality side. I think if you're making these kind of very expensive, potentially kind of sweeping changes, the data quality has to be high. So we spend a lot of time testing the actual sensors and trying to get a kind of reliable and high quality kind of hardware as possible. Oops.
Communication strategy. Well, this is something that is often front and center with organizations. And often, though, it's kind of completely forgotten. It's the other way around. And what I found with working on workplace design projects for a pretty long time, for sort of 20 years, is that there are two things which are the same on pretty much every project I've worked on. One is that people are suspicious about workplace change, and the other is that they're even more suspicious about workplace assessment. It's really important to clearly explain the reasons behind a workplace project. Normally, it's something simple like to create a better place for people to work. But if you don't explain it to them, people often assume that it's about cost cutting or it's about downsizing space. It's about taking stuff away from them as opposed to enhancing the space for them. And it's even more important when you're able to when you carry out workplace assessments, because often when a workplace assessment is done, people don't even think it's about the workplace. People assume it's about them. They don't know it's about getting to grips with understanding their needs so that we can create a better space. And that needs to explain to them, because if you don't, they're going to assume that some people might assume you're trying to check their work performance, but it's about cost cutting, but this time it's about downsizing people. And I think with manual surveys, one of the advantages of them in the past was that if someone was suspicious, they could go up to the person doing the survey and say, can you tell me what you're doing? And they could also look at the clipboard or the Palm Pilot or the iPad, and they could see what they're doing. But you can't do that with sensors. Now, on the plus side, the sensors, because they're hidden, it's not so front and center. You're not seeing a person walking every hour, so you're not reminded of it. But the fact that it's hidden also means that you can't look at that flipboard. So instead of that, what makes a really big difference is showing people the results of the data. So not just explaining what you're doing and why you're doing it, but also feeding back the information to them. And with sensors, you don't just have to feed back the information to them at the end of a survey. You can actually do it in real time. So people could maybe click on a dashboard and see what the findings of the sensors are in real time, and that can often make people feel much more sort of comfortable with the process.
We had one question on that around sensors only paint part of the picture in large organizations where the issues of utilization are more compelling. Knowing who is using the space is also important, which would seem to work counter to the privacy concerns, but I can understand where architects might want to know which groups or which category of person. How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, so I think that there absolutely, there definitely is a balance to be struck there. Now, what we can do is work with organizations, or OpenSensor work with organizations, to really work out what level of anonymity that you want to have. So there can be complete anonymity, or there can be, for instance, anonymity that doesn't tell you who the individual is, but might provide data on what group they're in, what team or department they're in, or might alternatively give information on what level they are within the organization, if they're executive or if they're general staff, etc. That can often, obviously, if you start to cross-reference that a bit too much, then if there's only one executive in a particular team, that starts to kind of ruin the anonymity. But generally, you'd be able to be able to process results that are anonymous enough, and that really that sort of no one is ever seeing who the individuals are. I think there is one sort of caveat to that, which is that we do. There's an obvious issue with, if there isn't hot desking, if people have their permanent desk, then you'll be able to pretty quickly work out, even if it's anonymous, if that's the only person who ever sits at that desk, then you kind of know how much time they're spending at their desk. And I think that that was always an issue with the space utilization studies, that people have to be comfortable with that kind of level of visibility of what they're doing.
Thank you.
There's two very distinct types of installs that we're seeing people make. I think there's the temporary install, which is for a month or 3 months. And that usually is for people to build a brief for a refurbishment project. Often they really kind of want to understand enough to get going for instance, future projects. And then there is the permanent installs, where this is likely done when there's kind of ongoing improvements to be made. Oops.
So I think what I've learned today is that architects are using data to fuel design and are moving from kind of rough rules of thumb to incorporate more granular data into the way that they're making decisions. And that OpenSensors is moving to enable this information to be fed into their existing tools and existing systems, the CAFM systems, the reservation systems at co-working facilities, systems like that. Any other final thoughts, Arjun or Yodit? And we're also going to open it up for questions. You can type your questions in now as well.
Yeah, just really that I think that sensors are a great additional tool for architects and designers. And I don't think that they provide all the answers for understanding user needs, but they're a really powerful part of the toolkit. I think that also just interviews, surveys, workshops with people, really bringing users into the process is still as useful and as viable as it's always been. I also think that what sensors can start to do is that they can give us more broad data. When we start looking at a series of buildings and how the sensor data might be different in different buildings. And that might be particularly useful for developers, even more so than specific building occupiers. And so it can really start to help us to understand how to design spaces better for maybe multiple tenants.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think as a technologist, it's very interesting seeing the kind of the maturation of the sensor installs and actually enabling people that are not very technical to work with these data sets. I'm fascinated what kind of impacts these trends are going to make, both in terms of the relationship between obviously kind of the landlords and occupiers, and how the trends that kind of started with, or are starting with, replacing a lot of the manual surveys will drive a lot of automation, a lot of kind of automation with in terms of meeting rooms and so forth, and seeing what kind of change it drives in terms of the design of the spaces, because you know I think everyone wants to, or is at least is trying to go towards multi-use, multi-purpose buildings, but you know we still have some way to go for that.
So Yodit, we had a question on the sensor types that are in use. Can you give maybe a brief rundown of the sensor types that are used to monitor desks and monitor meeting rooms?
Yeah, sure. So the network architecture that we favor is where the sensors talk to either via short range or long range radio, talk to gateways. And so if you imagine a kind of a network architecture, the sensors talk to the gateways, it's the gateways that actually talk to the internet. And these gateways talk via either Ethernet or a SIM card, but they sit outside of the corporate networks. The types of sensors we're seeing is kind of, for desks, it tends to be kind of PIR based. For meeting rooms, it can be both in terms of PIR or counters, just how many people are using this space. A lot of the vision-based sensors technologies are advancing, where people are deploying them for kind of breakout areas. So these give you much broader, like footfall information. All of these are anonymous sensors. I mean, they're doing very simple things like counting or understanding presence. So I think those are the starting points. The then once that people get this data, there's a lot of requests for environmental factors, and the environmental factors tend to be around noise, air quality, and so on. So for the built environment, at least, that's kind of the most in-demand sensors that we're seeing.
So I had I have a final question here from someone that says, do you feel we're at the very early stages of this technology? And I guess my question for both of you is, where do you feel we are with the maturity of this technology?
Yodit, do you want to start?
Sure.
I have my own answer if you want.
Yeah, you can. I think these the kind of the sensors I mentioned, they're in the early stages of adoption, so these are not new. Nothing here is kind of completely groundbreaking. These are sensors that have existed for a long time. I suppose the adoption, well, it's kind of the early stages of the adoption and the sophistication of use, I'd say. It's like horribly early, but the industry is moving quite fast, in my opinion. What's your view, Sean?
So we have standards for this. We have multiple manufacturers. We have multiple manufacturers for different sensor types. We have network designs that build on earlier existing internet designs. I heard a very interesting definition of IoT from a gentleman who'd been the CTO at Cisco for the Internet of Things, and he says what we call IoT are things that are now connected to the internet that we didn't expect to be connected to the internet. And so it's a kind of a temporary term for this. I think we're in the early stages of the build out, and you're going to see this become pervasive over the next 5 to 10 years. But this is not a visionary pitch in the same way that people talk about the hydrogen economy or nanotechnology or things that are, you really only have lab-based prototypes. There are real companies using these sensors today in use that feed into their systems that they use to manage that space. So we're well beyond the visionary stage into probably the pragmatic or early adopter stage.
What I think is that sensors are just going to become a kind of natural part of a workplace, really, and that they'll be like a kind of other utility, really, in a workplace. That they'll be seen as very important for the effective running of the building, for making sure that space is being used effectively and can change quickly for the business's needs. But I also think that they're going to become a much more of a utility for the end users themselves. So there'll be something that users will want to have in the workplace so that they can find out what's the quietest place to work at the moment, what's the noisiest place, if they want to have a more energetic space, but also so that they can make sure that the building is a healthy building. I think people might even be demanding certain sensors in the workplace so they know that they're not in a building that has poor air quality or has high CO2 levels. And I think that that'll be from 2 points of view. One from their own personal health, but also people who become more and more conscious of environmental health, and they don't want to be they will not want to be associated with a building or a company that has a negative environmental impact. So I think it's going to start to become user-driven, the use of sensors. And I think when that happens, that that suddenly there'll probably be a lot more uses for sensors that we might not have even thought of yet.
Thanks so much, Arjun. Thank you, Sean. And thank you for everyone that joined us. I hope this was informative. We do these kinds of webcasts and informative catch-ups periodically. If there's any particular subjects you'd like covered, please let me know. From everyone here from the OpenSensors team, thank you to Arjun and Sean, and thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.